Welcome back, everybody. This is our third and final Avid lab, and this will be a big one because we're going to look at effects and titling, and there's a lot to those things. Starting with titles, I'll show you how to make basic titles, but also I'll show you how to do rolling titles, which are the types of titles you see at the ends of movies for credits. And then as far as effects, there's lots of different types of effects. I'll show you some transition effects, things like fades and dissolves, but also segment effects that will impact maybe the color of a clip that you put on the timeline. So let's go ahead and dig into Avid Lab 3 titles and effects. Okay, let's get started with titles and effects. We'll begin with some basic effects that you might want to add to your project. Let's try to do a fade. We're going to fade in for this project. Now, if you're using Avid, there is a shortcut key. It's the button right underneath. Probably if you're on a Mac, it's underneath the delete key. If you're on a PC, it's probably underneath the backspace key, but it's that slash button. If you press that, that's going to open something called the quick transition tool. And this is going to allow us to make fades or dissolves. Now, in Avid, they kind of refer to almost everything as a dissolve, even if it's a fade. So just make sure your add is saying dissolve. If we want to do a fade in, the position for that effect should be starting at cut. Duration, if you're doing 30 frames per second, then 30 frames would be a 1 second effect. You can apply it to whatever tracks you want. So if you want to do a video and audio fade, just make sure those are selected when you do this. And then anytime you finish off effect, just make sure you hit add and render. That's going to make sure that it plays properly. So here it is on our timeline, and you can watch it play at real time. And there's the short little fade in. You'll notice on the timeline itself, I know it might be hard to see, but there's little purple boxes with a diagonal line through it to indicate that that is where the effect is. If I go to the end of the project and I want to add a fade out, I simply change the position to ending at cut, and there's my fade out. And if I wanted to dissolve between two shots, blend two together, I would change that to centered on cut. And I can see those two images blend together. Let's say I go back later and decide I don't want this dissolve to be there anymore. You should see this little button, this little control on your timeline. It'll be in a different place for yours, but it looks the same. It's like a do not enter sign. This will remove the effect. So just make sure the blue bar is touching the effect you want to remove, and then click on that remove effect button, and that will get rid of it. You also need to make sure that the tracks that effect is on are also turned on when you do that. Okay, so that's fades and dissolves. What about if you want to do fast motion, slow motion? Now I think on your version of Avid, it's possible this might not be enabled. So you might not be able to find this, but let me show you how it could work, and maybe some of you will be able to track this down on whatever system you're using. But let's just say I'm going to go to this part, and I'll have her flip through this blue notebook. So I'm going to establish an in and out point of what I want to change. And on my Avid system, there's a little button right here. It's called Motion Effect Editor. So I'm going to click on that. And that's going to bring up this window that says Motion Effect. And here it says Variable Speed. That's the one I want to change right now. I'm just going to set the percent speed to 50, and that will create a slow motion effect. So I hit Create and Render. It's going to create a new version of that clip. Notice it created a new version here in your bin that says 15 frames per second, and it's also loaded here in our composer window. And when I play that, there's our slow motion version of the shot. We can then edit this into the timeline if we want to. Okay, I'm going to go back to the original. Whenever you create new motion effects, you never want to work with a motion effect. You want to go back to the original clip. So I'm going to load that back up again. And I'll show you how to do a fast motion. Let's do 200% just to speed this up. There's the faster version of it. I'll go back to the original. And this time I'm going to type in -100. Let's see what happens when you put in negative numbers. Reverse motion, so if you need any kind of reverse motion, fast, slow, whatever, just type a negative in front of it and that will make the change. And then lastly, let me show you one more. I'm going to go 100, but I'm going to turn on something called strobe motion. We'll see what that effect is. So that's a kind of jerky motion. If you ever saw the film Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino, they have an opening title sequence with that kind of look. All it's doing is just taking every 5 frames and making duplicates of those 5 frames so it has this kind of jarring motion to it as it goes through. Okay, so that's the motion effect tool. Let's take a peek at freeze frame. If you ever need to freeze a frame for any reason, let's see how you do that. We've got this guy named Tim here, and he's got all kinds of great expressions that we might want to freeze. There's a good one right there. Let's say we want to keep that expression for a long time. Okay, I'm going to go into my composer window, right click. You should see something for freeze frame. 15 seconds will be fine. I will save that. That creates a new clip that has FF behind it. And if I play this, there's 15 seconds of Tim doing his thing. And I could edit this into the project just like this, like any other clip. Okay, so again, to get to freeze frame, you just right click inside the composer window, find your freeze frame button, and off you go. Okay, I'll get to some more effects here in a second, but I want to show you how to create some basic titles. So you should be able to go to your tools window or tools menu at the top and find something called Title Tool Application. And whenever you open it up, it should look something like this. This is a very simple title tool that allows us to create both basic titles, but also something called a burn-in title. Let's do a basic title first. Let's say you want the name of the movie to pop up at the start of the film. Notice right now how I'm seeing a picture right here. But let's imagine I only want to have just white text with a black background. Okay, you should see this little green V down here at the bottom of your title tool. We need to turn that off. That's going to turn off the background video and just leave us with only black background. If you need a different background besides black, just that BG color box right here will allow you to pick different colors as needed. Okay, so I've got the little T selected. That's going to allow me to type. I can type in my title. Once I click on the selection tool, now I can start moving this around. I can change the font to something different. I can center it within that little box, but notice it's not centered on the page. If you need to center it on the page itself, go to the alignment tool at the top and just click on these things like center and frame horizontally and vertically, and that should get you where you need it to be. You can also open up this alignment grid if you've got other elements that you want to try to organize within the title tool. If I want to change that text color, that's just fill color. I click on the fill box, change it to whatever I want. I can add drop shadow to this. I'll show that to you here in a second because it's not going to show up really well on this one. And you can create different shapes if you just need to create a box around this or a circle or lines. You can draw all those things. It's a real simple tool, so it doesn't have a ton of functionality, but it's going to create, I think, the titles that you need for most projects. So let's say it's good enough, that's what we want. I'm going to go ahead and save that title. And once I save it, that's going to pop it up here in my screen. There is the title I just created. You'll also see an icon for it in your bin. It's got a little purple T next to it, so that just lets you know that that's a title clip. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this into my movie. So I'm just going to set an endpoint, and I'll play just a little bit ahead. That's plenty. And I'll set an out point. I'm going to go down to my timeline. I'm going to get my playhead to the beginning. Okay, I want my title to be inserted, and I want to push everything else down. This is where we need to think about which tracks need to be turned on before we do this edit. Now, because I want everything to be pushed down, I need to turn on every one of my tracks to make sure that they're going to get pushed down when I do this edit. I also need to think about what type of edit I'm going to do, splice or overwrite. I don't want to erase anything here at the beginning. I want to push it all down, so that's going to mean it's going to be a splice edit. So that's the yellow arrow edit. If you're using the shortcut key on your keyboard, that's the letter V. So that title got added, goes into my movie. Now, I'm going to remove this fade. Actually, I'll put that back real quick. Let's say I want a little bit of gap of black in between the title and the start of the film. Okay, that's something called filler. If I go up here to my composer window and right-click, I can see load filler, and all this is just black video. So let's say I just want 15 frames of black. All I did here, I set an endpoint in filler, and then I move forward 15 frames, however far you want, doesn't matter. I set an out point. I've still got everything selected down here on my timeline. I hit splice, and there's a nice little gap before my movie begins. And then I could go in and I could turn off these tracks, except for video. And I could add a short little fade out and fade in on my title just to kind of clean it up, make it look better. And there my movie starts. Okay, so that's a very simple, basic title. Let's say we want a title, though, that shows up. Maybe it's a directed by title that shows up over the picture. Let me show you how to do that. I'm going to go back to my title tool application. It's opening up right now. Okay, and let's say I want my title to come in right here as the door's opening. So I'm going to park my blue bar in my timeline right where I want it to start. And then I click on my title tool, and that shows me a reference frame for me to work with. This is where we do want the green V to be turned on, because we do want to see picture with title. Okay, I'm going to go back to that one font I had. I can't remember what it was, but I think it's this one. And I'll just do a quick little directed by me, and I will shrink that a little bit and place that within frame where I want it. When you're doing burn-in titles, try to find a place where it's darker, where your letters are going to show up better. But I'm going to put it over here just so you can see something new. I'm going to show you something. Let's say you do have a background that maybe gets a little light. This is where we could add some drop shadow to this to make it pop just a little bit more. So with this selected, I've got this little box over here, and if I click and drag on that little gray box, I'll see a black box emerge. That's the shadow. And that's not showing up super great. I'm going to just change the color of that just so it pops out a little bit more. There you can see the shadow popping out a little bit more, but I don't like that So I'm going to change it back to black. Maybe there you see it a little bit better. So that might give you some separation between text and background if you need it. But let's say that's good enough, so I will save this title. And I'll close my tool. And notice whenever this title opens up in the Composer window, I don't see the background. Okay, all that black you see right here, this is just transparency. So anything that's black here, video is going to show through. Okay, I need to get this into my timeline. So I'm going to just set a quick little in and out point. Okay, that's good. And I want it to come in right here, but the problem is I've only got one video track. To do this effect, I need to have a second video track. So just like we did with the audio, I'm going to right-click inside my timeline. I'm going to go to New, and this time I'm going to hit New Video Track. That'll add a V2 track. I'm then going to drag V1 up to V2 to make sure that it's going to go on that track. And at this point, I recommend anytime you're doing stuff on V2, like say you're using this to add a bunch of titles, I think you should get in the habit of using your overwrite edit instead of splice. When you do use overwrite on this track, it just keeps things from moving around and maybe getting out of position. So I'm going to use the letter B, or it's the red arrow. I'm going to put that in and notice how I'm seeing the title show up with the picture. And I can do all the same stuff I did before, right? Add it, fade in and fade out to make it clean. I don't know if you see this on yours, but there's this little box that shows up next to video tracks. If that little box is on V1 instead of V2, you won't see your title. So just make sure that that's selected. This is something I didn't talk about when I talked about sound editing, but if you want to do like audio tracks, you want to turn them off or on. Those little M buttons next to each audio track will mute them if you want to turn them off. Or if you want to hear just one at a time, just click the S button, that's for solo, and you could hear just one audio track. Okay, so that's your basic titles. So this one was a basic kind of normal title. This is what we call a burn-in title that shows with video. Okay, let me just show you a little bit of the effects. This is called the effects palette. Now, if you've got the free version, you'll see a place kind of on the far left of the screen that says effect palette. Just click on that. If you're using my version, I've got this little purple box that takes me to it. But whenever you get to the effect palette, you're going to see just hundreds of different effects to play with. And on this side, you're going to see different menus of effects to work with. So maybe there's a certain thing you want to look for. Just click on the menu and that will help direct you to the right one. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there are two basic types of effects: transition effects and segment effects. Transition effects are things like wipes, dissolves that go in between two clips on the timeline that are going to transition one shot to another shot. I'll show you one real quick, and yeah, I am going to try to find some kind of wipe. Let's do maybe a peel. Okay, so I'm going to do a peel between one shot and the other shot. I'll make sure my V2 track is turned on, so it's going to be added to that. I'll grab one of these, and I'm just going to drop it right on the edit, and it should kind of highlight. I know you cannot see it, but there's a little blue line right there that shows that it's hitting that edit. And then when I release it, let me zoom in so you can see it a little better. There's my transition, and there's the horrible peel between those two shots. Yeah, that's not cool. Okay, so if I want to get rid of that, remember you can always hit that remove effect to get rid of anything you don't want. All right, so that's a transition effect, and there's all kinds of those in Avid. But you might also want to do something called a segment effect. That's something that impacts an entire clip on the timeline, or even more than one clip if you want to. I'm going to go find a simple thing called color effect. For me, it's in the image menu, but I think for you, you'll find it in a color menu if you're using that version of Avid. So find in the color menu something called color effect, and just drag it on top of any shot you see on your timeline. So I've got mine on top of this shot right here, this close-up. Now whenever I put it on here, you don't see any change. We need to edit that effect. To get to that, we need to go into effect mode to get to our effect editor. Now on yours, I think it's somewhere in the middle of your timeline. For me, it's way over here on the end, and it's like these two little faders that go left and right. I'm going to click on that, and that should open up my effect editor. There's all kinds of tools inside of this. I'm going to open it up so you can see it better. And this color effect allows you to do many things. I'm just going to do some simple stuff. I'm going to pull out all the saturation that's underneath something called Chroma Adjust, SAT for saturation. And check it out. If you want black and white, just pull out the saturation, and there you go. Let's say you want to do some real simple color correction. Let's say your shot was too blue. Well, here's my blue. I can pull that out and get rid of any blue I had, or add blue if that's what I'm going for. You can do simple brightening, darkening, contrast control. You can even do this stuff called posterize, which kind of looks like a cheesy 1980s music video. Or solarize, which kind of takes it to a negative image. So there are some things to play with here that can be kind of fun. And there are just, again, hundreds of other effects that I won't try to even show you, but you might want to just go in and play with to see what they can do, because there might be a lot of these that are pretty interesting and pretty helpful to you. Okay, I don't know if you can notice, I'm going to try to zoom in on this a little bit. Whenever I add effects to my timeline, a lot of times you're going to see a little dot next to it. And typically that dot's going to be either green or blue. If you see a green dot on an effect, that means that effect is what we call a real-time effect. It's a relatively simple effect that does not need to be rendered in order to play. Right now, if I play this, it's fine. It doesn't need to have any changes made to it in order to work. If I had something that was blue, a blue dot, that means it's a more complex effect that will not play unless it's rendered. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and render this even though it doesn't have to be, just so you can watch what happens when you render something. But if you do have something that needs to be rendered like a blue dot non-real-time effect, just go up to your timeline toolbar and you should see this little film frame with a triangle next to it. It says render effect. I'm going to click on that, making sure that my blue bar is touching the effect I want to render. It'll say one effect to render, or whatever, how many you have selected. I'm going to hit OK. Notice what happens. That dot goes away. Basically, I've saved this effect to my hard drive, and now it will play with no problems. So if that was a blue dot non-real-time effect, I wasn't seeing it work, but once I rendered it, now it is working. That's a rendered effect. Okay, let me show you one final thing. Okay, let's say you're ready to finish your project and you need to export this out as a video file. Okay, this will be different depending on what system you're using. If you're using my version of Avid, I'll show you how to do it. It's similar to what you'll have on your version of Avid. I'm going to go to the sequence that I'm working on, want to trade. Okay, I'm going to right-click on that sequence. And for me, it's called output. If you're working on your version, it's probably called publish. On your version, you'll probably see some options like for YouTube or Vimeo, but also local drive. Okay, if you want to publish this to YouTube, that's fine, but I recommend maybe you just publish this to your local drive. That way you have the digital file on your computer, and then you can upload it to the Moodle page, or you can compress it if you need to. We'll talk about that here in a second. But for me, whenever I need to output something, I'm going to do something called export to file. My version of Avid has all kinds of different options for exporting that you don't have on your free version. You basically have one way to send something out. Okay, normally whenever we export stuff out of this version of Avid, we're going to send it out as a QuickTime movie. And that's what I have selected right here, send to QT movie. It's a good idea to check your options and your settings to make sure they're all okay. In fact, this one is not okay because my aspect ratio for this project is 4:3. So I need to change that there. Make sure video and audio selected. Everything else looks good. I'll hit save. I'm going to save it to my desktop. Just save it somewhere where it's easy for you to find it. And then the export process will begin. Now, depending on how complex this project is, it could take some time, but mine was a relatively simple project that quickly exported. And we'll see if we can take a peek at it here. Since I created a QuickTime file, I have to open it with QuickTime Player in order for it to work. It won't work with Windows Media Player. But there's the project that we just had on our timeline. It is now a digital file that we can send out and do whatever we want to with. Here's the problem though, typically when you export files out of Avid, I'm going to go to the properties for this file. Okay, just that little small sequence that I created is a pretty big file. It's almost 200 megabytes in size. So you can imagine if you had something of more complexity, it's going to be many, many gigabytes for that file. And typically it's hard to upload files like that because they're too big. So in this case, we want to use some kind of compression tool, or sometimes it's called an encoder, to shrink the size of that project. Now, there's one that Adobe has. It's called Adobe Media Encoder. So if you've got your Adobe Creative Cloud license, you can use Media Encoder to compress your file. And I'll just go through it real quick. It's a pretty simple thing to do. I've got Media Encoder open here. I'm going to go File, Add Source. Here on the desktop, I'm going to track down my Wanna Trade project. Okay, notice it's loaded right here, and it's got all these different presets that you can look at. And I'm just going to create a real simple YouTube preset. In fact, I'll just do a really small one, YouTube 480. That means the resolution's 480 lines of resolution. Once you have the preset that you like, just hit that play button right there. It's going to compress the file, basically recreate a new version of it. Really quick. Here's the new version here on my desktop. This one I double click on because I can open it with my normal media player. So there is that file. And let's see the size of this one. Properties. That one's all the way down to 22 megabytes. So it really compressed it down to a much, much smaller file. Highly recommend that whenever you're working with video files, that before you send them out, compress them, especially if you're trying to upload stuff to the Moodle page, and because Moodle will probably just crash if you try to upload really large video files to it. Okay, that's probably all we can get through with effects without being way too overwhelming. So let's just do a quick recap. We had our fades and our dissolves. That was just a quick transition button. Remember that? That's the one that's right underneath your delete button, the little slash key that opens up your ability to do fade in, fade out, or dissolves. We had the motion effect that allows us to do slow motion, fast motion, reverse motion, strobe motion. We had our basic titling tool that allows us to create normal titles with the no green V, or burn-in titles with the green V. Remember, if you are doing a burn-in title, we need a second video track so that it will play and the other video will play underneath it. For more complex effects, go to your effect palette. There are all the menus for your different effects. We have transition effects that go between shots. We have segment effects that go on entire shots. Every now and then we need to render. There's my little green dot. I'm going to render that effect. There's the little button for it, the film frame with the triangle next to it. That will ensure that it's going to play. If I need to remove an effect, that's this little button right here. It looks like a do not enter sign. That will get rid of it. To output my project, just right click on the sequence that I want to output. For you, it probably says publish. Send it to your local drive. That will create a big file, and then once you have that big file created, use Media Encoder to compress it. Okay, so that's all we're going to do on Avid. And again, I know it's hard to do this at home, especially if you're not even working with Avid. But hopefully this at least gives you a taste of what this program can do and what other programs can do. And whenever we come back for MC352, we'll take a deeper look and we'll get you some hands-on experience with this program. Okay, that's it for this lesson. Take care. That's it for our Avid labs. I know, again, it's probably pretty overwhelming, all the different tools and functionality that Avid has. Remember that I have handouts on the Moodle page that go through a lot of the terminology and shortcuts that we talked about during the demonstrations, so please use that as a resource. And of course, contact me anytime if you have questions. And also, if you have questions about the program you're using, let me know, and we'll try to figure out how to get you through it. Hope things are going well. We'll see you next time. Take care.